Hello, this is the December 13th, 2010 issue of United Nations Week News and Views. My name is John Kerry, and I'm responsible for the views on this program unless I indicate some other source, and then I'm still responsible. The purpose of the program is to bring to your attention newsworthy events at the UN that you probably won't find in any other news medium. I want to talk today about two statements made in the last week by our #1 ambassador to the UN, Susan Rice. And I want to first of all give you a little biographical information on her as it appears in the website of the U.S. mission. From 2002 to 2009, she was a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, where she focused on U.S. foreign policy, transnational security threats, weak states, global poverty, and development. From 1997 to 2001, she was the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. In this position, she formulated and supplemented overall U.S. policy for 48 countries of sub-Saharan Africa, including political, economic, security, and humanitarian issues. As Assistant Secretary, she oversaw the management of 43 U.S. embassies and over 5,000 U.S. and Foreign Service national employees. With a Bureau operating budget of over $100 million and a program budget of approximately $160 million annually. In 2000, Ambassador Rice was co-recipient of the White House's 2000 Samuel Nelson Drew Memorial Award for distinguished contributions to the formation of peaceful cooperative relationships between states. From 1995 to 1997, Ambassador Rice served as Special Assistant to President William J. Clinton and Senior Director for African Affairs at the National Security Council at the White House. Prior to this position, she served as the Director of International Organizations and Peacekeeping on the National Security Council staff from 1993 until 1995. Previously, she was a management consultant with McKinsey & Company and also served on numerous boards, including the National Democratic Institute, the Partnership for Public Service, and the U.S. Fund for UNICEF. Ambassador Rice received her MPhil, master's degree, and DPhil, PhD, in international relations from New College, Oxford, where she was a Rhodes Scholar. She was awarded the Chatham House British International Studies Association Prize for the most distinguished doctoral dissertation in the United Kingdom in the field of international relations. I repeat, she was awarded the Chatham House British International Studies Association Prize for the most distinguished doctoral dissertation in the United Kingdom in the field of international relations. She received her BA in History with honors from Stanford University, where she graduated Junior Phi Beta Kappa and was a Truman Scholar. Ambassador Rice is married and has 2 children. My comment is, who could ask for anything more? Now I turn to 2 statements that she made last week. And I want to go into these at some length because the U.S. media pay little or no attention to what happens at the UN itself unless there's some sort of scandal or big dispute. But let alone paying attention to what our U.S. representatives do and say there. It's really shocking to me that there's not more coverage of this. So I'm doing my part here to remedy that defect. On Friday the 10th, she made these 2 statements. The first of them is sheer idealism on human rights for all. The second is as practical and urgent as could be on the nuclear threat from Iran. So first about human rights. Today, she says, I join President Obama. By the way, this month, December, Ambassador Rice is presiding in the Security Council. The presidency rotates, and the U.S. turn is December. She says, I join President Obama in commemorating the 62nd anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And of course, Eleanor Roosevelt was the chair of the committee that drafted that declaration. Rice continued, we reaffirm the wisdom of its drafters who gave eloquent voice to the cause of human rights and human dignity in the wake of World War II. And we honor those who risked persecution in the service of its brave ideals. The U.S. has long worked to live up to the promise of our own founding documents with their credo of liberty and equal rights under law. Our willingness to measure our deeds against our words and acknowledge our shortcomings has continually renewed the promise of America and given us strength. Let me comment here by saying it's not a sign of weakness to admit that you're not perfect. Quite the opposite. She goes on to say, the spirit of our founding promise inspired one great American, Eleanor Roosevelt, to chair the UN committee that wrote the Universal Declaration. That spirit, unlimited heroic American movements for the rights of women, African Americans, and other minorities. And that spirit still places America squarely on the side of any girl who is barred from school, any boy who is sold into slavery, any individual who is assaulted because of his or her sexual orientation. We will always stand for the student who longs to be taught, for the voter who demands to be heard, for the oppressed who longs to be free. Continuing, Rice said, we continue to see the world as it is, but we continue to work for the world as it can be. As President Obama said at the UN General Assembly in September, quote, tyranny is still with us, unquote. In November, the UN General Assembly voted by the largest margin in history to condemn blatant human rights abuses by the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and condemned abuses by the regimes in Burma and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Quote, on Human Rights Day, the United States celebrates deep truths we hold to be self-evident and honors a stirring declaration signed by 58 nations, a universal affirmation that human rights have equal worth, equal dignity, equal consequence, and equal rights. And we continue to work for the day when no one will endure discrimination or suffer persecution, unquote. And here is Ambassador Rice's second statement, this one with dire overtones. Quote, 6 months ago, almost to the day, the Council adopted Resolution 1929 in response to Iran's continued refusal to comply with its international nuclear obligations. Since then, Iran's noncompliance with its obligations to the Security Council and under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has persisted. So has its lack of full cooperation with the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. And so, as we have just heard, have its numerous violations of Security Council resolutions. Quote, allow me to make 3 brief points on the current situation and appropriate next steps, says Rice. First, unfortunately, when it comes to Iran's actions, that not much has changed since we last met. Iran continues to violate its obligations to the IAEA and the Security Council. The IAEA Director General's latest report on Iran, released just a few weeks ago, again underscores Iran's continued refusal to comply with its international nuclear obligations and to cooperate fully with the IAEA. Most notably, the report underscores Iran's ongoing uranium enrichment at 3.5% and near 20% levels. The report also details Iran's continued construction of a heavy water research reactor, its refusal to permit the IAEA the access it needs to answer long-standing questions about the Ulm enrichment facility, and its non-response to the questions around a possible military dimension to Iran's nuclear program. In sum, the IAEA's latest report records Iran's continued defiance of its international obligations and shows that Iran has yet to take meaningful steps required by this Council and called for by the IAEA Board of Governors. Quote, from Rise 2nd, we must continue to maintain the pressure on Iran to change course. All member states have an obligation to fully implement Security Council obligations. We urge those that have not yet done so to report to the committee on their national implementation efforts as soon as possible. These Security Council resolutions affirm obligations on Iran with a clear objective: to resolve the international community's concerns about Iran's nuclear activities. The 1737 Committee, that's a Security Council committee established by Resolution 1737, and the recently constituted panel of experts will help maintain the pressure on Iran by monitoring and improving the implementation and enforcement of the Iran sanctions regime. In particular, we urge the committee, with the panel's support, to investigate thoroughly all reported sanctions violations. We commend Nigeria for having seized Iranian arms exported in violation of UN sanctions. We also commend Italy for seizing items that Syria was attempting to procure illicitly from Iran. Investigations into these incidents can help us better understand and to halt Iran's arms smuggling and proliferation networks in violation of this Council's resolutions. Quote, we are pleased that the panel of experts is now operational. The panel is an exceptionally well-qualified team, and we expect that it will significantly improve our ability to monitor and tighten enforcement. Finally, let me reiterate, says Ambassador Rice, my government's commitment to a dual-track strategy of both pressure and engagement to convince Iran's leaderships to change course. Earlier this week, we held frank discussions and dialogue between Iran and our E3+3 partners. We aim to continue the careful phased process of building confidence between Iran and the international community. As we have said before, we recognize Iran's rights, but we insist that Iran fulfill the obligations that come along with those rights. Iran's choice remains clear. If it builds international confidence and respects its obligations, we will reciprocate. But if Iran refuses, its isolation will only grow. We will have our actions on Iran's degree of cooperation. We look forward to continued talks in late January to discuss practical ideas for a way forward to resolve our core concerns. We remain committed, says Ambassador Rice, to working closely with our partners in this Council, that's the Security Council, and the international community to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. End of quote from the second statement of Ambassador Rice at the end of last week. Well, friends, that's all for this issue of United Nations Week, News and Views. We'll be back with the next issue. Meantime, do send along your own ideas on these or other UN-related issues to www.unweek.blogspot.com. Thank you for watching. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you soon.